On today's episode of Some Assembly Required, we'll be talking about education funding, and especially special education funding. My name is Evan Goyke. I'm the state representative from the 18th Assembly District in the city of Milwaukee, filling in for Assembly Minority Leader Representative Gordon Hintz. I'm here also and will be joined by Representative Dave Considine from the 81st Assembly District, who's going to discuss his thoughts, his background on the education budget, and other legislation he's working on. This is Some Assembly Required, a podcast hosted by the Wisconsin Assembly Democratic Caucus, discussing what's happening in the state capitol and all things Wisconsin. I'm your guest host today, Representative Evan Goyke from the 18th Assembly District in Milwaukee. In the November 2018 gubernatorial election, education funding was one of, if not the most central issue in the campaign. Wisconsin has never had a governor with greater education policy experience than Tony Evers. He's known as the education governor because he's been a teacher, a school district administrator, and superintendent of our public schools. Not surprising that in his first state budget, Governor Evers introduced an ambitious and transformational education budget. Governor Evers' budget proposed to add $1.4 billion in new state funding for the public schools of Wisconsin. This, of course, is needed following 8 years of regressive policy and major cuts to public school funding by Republicans and Governor Scott Walker. One of the central issues in Governor Evers' education budget was the funding for special education. Currently, school districts get less than 30 cents on the dollar for the cost of educating a child with special needs. This has created budget gaps in every school district in every corner of the state. As a member of the Joint Committee on Finance, as we toured around the state and listened to advocates and parents and students and school district administrators, special education funding, or the lack thereof, was the most important issue in education funding facing schools in Wisconsin today. Governor Evers proposed to increase the 30 cents on a dollar or less to 60 cents on the dollar, providing much needed funding for our schools. However, legislative Republicans were unable to meet the governor's leadership and increased that proposal only to 30% by the second year of the biennium. The Republican budget invested a total of $97 million of additional spending in special education, while Governor Evers had proposed a transformational $600 million. We know that the Republican effort will fall short of what school districts need, and school districts will continue to face budget crisis because of this low reimbursement. This is some progress, but it's important to note that the Republicans fell short in their budget, state's commitment to two-thirds funding of public education, and they fell short of their own Blue Ribbon Commission on Public Education. Now, before we turn it over and talk about what's next in the legislature, I just want to tell a brief story to put a face and a family to special education funding in Wisconsin, because, of course, we're not talking today about something that's this is something that really affects people's lives and can have a dramatic impact. I met with a mom, and I'm not going to use their names just to keep their privacy, but she came all the way from Milwaukee to Madison to meet with me and to share her experience. She's got a little kid, a little boy, classic little kid, full of energy, really knows how to use his phone and his tablet better than I do, and he has special needs. And when he was in kindergarten and first grade, he had 4 students to 1 teacher, and he was making progress. And his vocabulary, his reading, his behavior were all improving. And mom and the school knew it was because he was getting the direct one-on-one attention that his needs deserve. In a few years, because of the inability of Republicans in Madison to fund special education adequately, the school district had to make cuts. And that meant that this young boy's class size doubled. So where he was 1-to-4 ratio, he now had 1-to-8. And so his attention, the one-on-one attention that he got, decreased. What else decreased? His progress. He plateaued and regressed, and we had discipline in school began to become an issue. And mom and the teachers in the school district all admitted that this came back to resources, the ability to give this young boy the time, attention, care, and instruction that he deserves. I was proud to advocate for increased special education because of that little guy and his mom and his teacher, all of whom I have the honor of representing. We're going to move forward and talk to somebody who he himself has been in the classroom as a special education teacher, who probably has stories like this from his own background. So please welcome to some assembly required Representative Dave Considine from the 81st District. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we get in to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of the education policy, just give us a little rundown. I prefaced that you have some experience as an educator. Tell us what you bring to the table in that regard as a member of the Assembly.
I spent 30 years before I was elected to State Assembly teaching special education in the D-Baraboo School District. 28 of those years were specifically for students labeled emotionally behaviorally disordered, but I also did some work earlier on with cognitively disabled students, many other impaired students. But I specialized in behavioral change.
Wow. So I know you're passionate about this issue. Discuss for us a little bit about what these funding challenges that I've outlined, what do they mean to school districts or communities in the 81st District?
They mean a significant loss of money for the general education population. We have continually, as a state legislature and at a national level, increased mandates for what local school districts have to do for special education. And I'm totally in favor of doing that. We can't afford as a community to leave anybody behind. However, I think along with those mandated programs, the state and the federal government need to help fund those. And we are not doing that anywhere near adequately. Most of that comes out of the general ed budget.
So I talked a little bit in the introduction about where we ended up with the Republican budget. So what are some next steps for advocates, for parents, for people that want to see this happen? Future budgets, or what's left for us to do to get the funding that our school districts need?
Good question. Certainly with Governor Evers and his proposal, there was a lot of backing, and every one of my school districts was way in support of Governor Evers' budget, and I served parts of 6 different school districts. They were really happy for the additional funding at all, and I totally get that, but they make no bones about saying it's not enough and we need to do a whole lot more. They're especially looking forward to some transparency in regards to vouchers, and I think especially for special needs vouchers. Those are extremely hard on a school district. Students that we never serve, special educators have to write IEPs for. That is a consuming process. And the process of special needs vouchers, the IEP doesn't really have to be followed. Private schools can interpret those any way they want, even though a professional special educator has to write those IEPs. And those are hours and hours of time.
And you brought up the special needs voucher, and just I want to put a point in how important special education funding is. The Republicans have said that it's very important because they give voucher schools 90 cents on the dollar for the cost when they are educating a special needs student. It's the public system that they have refused to extend the same reimbursement rate to. So we have these two very separate and unequal tracks, 90 cents on the dollar for private unaccountable voucher schools and 30 cents on the dollar for public schools that are educating the vast majority of kids in the state of Wisconsin. One point that I wanted to make that I think is really important here. I represent the central city of Milwaukee. You don't. You have a little different district, and we've just outlined an issue. I want to say thank you for bringing forward the point of view from rural, smaller school districts. They are identical issues that we have in Milwaukee or Madison, and the special education reimbursement is an issue that impacts every single corner of the state. It doesn't matter if you live in rural, suburban, or urban. This is hitting the schools that your kids go to.
Especially so you talk about special needs vouchers, that 90% gap is mostly made up by local property taxpayers. It's not made up for the Republicans in the state budget. It's taken directly out of local property taxpayers, but they have to do it.
Yeah, time for the state to recognize its obligation. Time for maybe some more Democrats to take some of these seats in the state capitol.
I think that's an important thing.
And if Republicans won't lead on special education, which they've shown that they won't, Democrats in the Assembly certainly will. So I want to get to know you a little bit better, and I want you to talk a little bit about yourself and your district. So Representative Considine, can you remember the exact moment that you decided to run for the state assembly? Tell us a little bit about that decision.
Exact moment.
I mean, I want the exact moment. No, if you can't remember the minute and the second, what drew you to running?
I was not drawn to running. Let's be honest. My predecessor in the state assembly got together a group of 40 people that really supported him, and we talked about what the best representative from our district would look like. We threw all sorts of names on the board. Mine was one of them. My wife's was one of them. But it became obvious. We had a list of 7 people after the first meeting that we were going to call and ask to run. They weren't going to run. There were other things going on in their lives. And I left that meeting feeling like, hey, this is a job someone needs to do. I'm a fairly smart, intelligent person. I think I can do this. Had no idea, to be honest, what I was getting into. Spent several weeks thinking about whether or not to do it, and decided, I'm going to go for it. My wife about killed me, by the way, but that's beside the point.
Tell us, I know how you feel. My wife wants to kill me all the time. What's been the biggest surprise? So you win, you're a member of the assembly. What's been one of the biggest surprises?
Oh, I guess, to be honest, it's how little my colleagues understand about education, and especially about special education. When we debated the special needs vouchers and we're talking about IEPs, people looked at me like, huh? Like they had no idea what that process was. And so I guess the biggest surprise was how much I feel like my voice is needed here.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, obviously, with your experience, it absolutely is. Teach us about the 81st District. Where is it? What communities do you represent?
It basically encumbers the eastern half of Sauk County into Columbia County to Portage, 3 townships in Dane and 1 in Iowa County. So it's a fairly rectangular district with a lot of little chips and pieces taken out here and there.
Biggest city is Baraboo?
Biggest city is Baraboo, followed by Portage.
All right. So we've got a couple months left in session. What kinds of things are you working on, that goals for you and your office between now and the end of the legislative session?
I think one of the things that's severely lacking here and in Washington is a trust in professionals, whether it's a trust in teachers to know education, whether it's a trust in doctors and nurses to know medicine, that much of our professional care is taken care of by actuarialists and is totally based on money and not really upon need. And so I'm working on some things. One of them I call teaching over testing. The whole point of mandated testing, we know that more than 85% of the population do poorly on standardized tests. And yet we grade schools, kids, and teachers on standardized tests. We need to start making teaching more important than testing. And the same thing's true in other areas. I'm working on some agriculture things that will, I hope, return some power to farmers so that they can make decisions that they need to make.
Oh, those are great. Those are excellent initiatives that are incredibly needed, and certainly you got my support. I think earlier you were referring to your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, those less educated, and our caucus representative really, we always do the deep dives into the policy, and that's why some Assembly Required is so entertaining, because the Assembly Democrats really are scholars, and it's pretty impressive group of legislators.
And they're pretty diverse.
And are diverse and bring a lot of
Very
different
diverse.
backgrounds to the table. And in that, I think lots of different voices that need to be heard, whether that's professional or different communities is great. Okay. So some Assembly Required podcasts are the tradition, our format is that we're going to end with a speed round. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. I'm going to ask that you try your best to just answer them Politicians, we like to spin as much as possible, but try not to. And
just take all the fun out of it.
No. This is all about you. So the first question. Late night legislative session, debating the budget. It's midnight. What is your go-to food? What is your guilty pleasure in the middle of the night? State Capitol. Go.
Popcorn.
All right. Barbecue or fish fry?
Fish fry.
Goat farming or crop farming?
Goat farming.
History or English?
Ooh, history.
Baking or cooking?
Baking.
Wollersheim Winery or Wollersheim Distillery?
Distillery.
My Handkerchief or Gordon Hintz cowboy hat? Right here, Dave. Right
Boy
here,
Scouts.
Dave.
I gotta go with Boy Scouts.
I'm right here. Half and half or creamer?
Half and half.
Canoe or kayak?
Ooh, kayak.
Vacation or staycation?
Staycation.
One task or multitask?
One.
Recipe or no recipe?
No recipe.
All right. I like that. All right. So this Representative Considine, I want to say thank you. And it was fun to have you on. Some assembly required. You bring an incredibly important voice from the classroom and from rural Wisconsin to the caucus and to the legislature. It's been a privilege to have you on and get to know you and to share your background and all your crazy speed round questions with the listeners. So I want to just say thank you to the listeners. This has been Some Assembly Required. My name is Evan Goyke, guest host and slightly better host than Representative Gordon Hintz, senior producer and creative lead Shinya Tao, coffee provided by Groshek Farms. You can find Some Assembly Required on Stitcher Radio and Apple Podcasts. Please find us, subscribe, and give us a favorable rating, especially me. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you, and see you next time.